Isaac took a deep breath of fresh air and sighed contentedly. He might live in the woods, but there was something entirely different about the beautiful Scottish valley he'd found himself in. Sadly, this breathtaking scene before him had housed a dark secret, the horrific dungeon that would eventually gain the designation of Sanity's End. First, it had become a black hole that people walked into but never came out of. Next, when that wave of deaths had seemingly come to an end, people had come back out of the dungeon, often carrying one of the supposed casualties out along with them. But that had only been the opening shot of an even worse catastrophe. Some of the people who returned went nuts. A few simply rampaged through wherever they were when the madness began, but those were the lesser issues. No, the real problems were the manipulated, who had been placed strategically to specifically cause trouble, keeping it together until they were in the optimal position to inflict maximum damage, effectively crippling everything in the area. Law enforcement, Summoner Association, emergency services, everything. And finally, when it seemed like things couldn't possibly get any worse, the dungeon had erupted into a flood of monsters, a slavering horde of beasts that tore apart a good chunk of Britain before an effective defense could be mounted. Even then, it had taken weeks to put a lid on everything and shatter the dungeon core, which was by way of a trio of magically enhanced nuclear bunker busters. Millions dead, a country in ruins, and the manipulated cropping up even years after the dungeon's destruction to cause further havoc. Yet, despite the threat, Isaac couldn't place it in his data dump because he hadn't known when the dungeon was created. Theoretically, he could have listed the threat anyway, but this was a situation where he absolutely had to make sure every detail was correct. Any mistake, and that really meant any mistake, no matter how small, would have damaged his credibility, which he couldn't afford under any circumstances. An anonymous message accusing a whole lot of people, some very influential, would have been screwy enough. That same accusation, accompanied by any errors to reduce credibility, would have sounded like a prank or attempted slander, rather than anything genuine and actionable. Also, there was the small issue of him not knowing what kind of dungeon this was. Had some numbskull created a regular old dungeon and accidentally turned it into a huge threat by giving it the eldritch type? Or was this all the work of a dungeon master who'd been a fan of Lovecraft's work, built a dungeon based on it, and gotten himself killed, thereby freeing it? Or had it been a deliberate, slowly progressing terrorist attack?